back in the day, I think that's how coaching was offered is like, if you don't change, we're going to have to get you a coach. It's going to whip you into shape. That is not at all what coaching is about. And when it's looked at as something that's proactive, premeditated opportunity to develop emergent talent, arising talent, people engage with it differently.
Welcome to the AEC Growthcast from PSMJ Resources, hosted by President Gregory Hart. This no theory, no fluff episode shares real takeaways from the top AEC experts who know what works in today's competitive market.
Hello and welcome to the AEC Growth Cast. My name is Greg Hart, president here at PSMJ. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a great episode in store. We're going to do a deep dive on leadership coaching, and we're going to talk about the distinction between coaching and mentoring, all sorts of things you can do to coach and develop your future leaders. That's right in our wheelhouse here at PSMJ. We're going to do a deep dive with a friend of the podcast here, Laura Weiss, who's an executive coach and an architect by training, and she's got some good perspective. Always fun talking to Laura. So talk to her in a little bit. We're also fresh off AEC Talent Max, which is our learning and development / knowledge management / talent acquisition conference, which happened about a month or so ago. And then a few weeks ago, we had our AEC Innovate conference, which is our AI tech and innovation conference. It's so encouraging to see so much innovation happening around the industry that's not specifically related to AI and tech and the topics that consume a lot of the energy in any conversation around innovation. We're seeing in learning and development, in recruiting, in knowledge management, in project management. Virtually every facet of firm management is being touched by, hey, what if there's a different way to do it, right? What if there's a way to get more aggressive on how we select clients? What if there's a way to push the envelope more on pricing? What if there's a way we can get away from the time-based business model that we've been shackled with for so many years? So we're going through that transition. It's like the whole industry is in startup mode all over again. That I think is super encouraging because it seems like so many of the conversations I've had over the past few months have been about reinvention and about respecting the legacy of the organization, but also embracing change and all the opportunity that comes with that. So super exciting time to be in our industry. I think a good encapsulation of why it's such an exciting time to be in the industry is our metric of the month. So we're going to pull a data point from our just released 2026 AE Financial Performance Benchmark Survey data set, which has been around for decades. The new data's out. Some of you might have it already. If I had to pick one metric out of that whole survey, the best kind of bellwether, I guess, of an overall health of the firms and health of the industry, it's the operating profit margin on net revenues. So that number, the metric of the month there for this episode is 20.5. 20.5% is the operating profit margin on net revenue. That's a record. Okay. It's bumped around between 18 and 20 for the past couple of years, but 20.5 is a record. And that's the median value, I should point out, the median of the data set. So half of you are above that. Some of you are well above that. Kudos, first of all, to the industry for continuing to push that. And why is that, right? Why are we seeing these sorts of numbers now? Of course, there's some strong market conditions for a lot of firms. There's a lot of organizations in the industry right now that are having a nice tailwind from healthy market conditions. Of course, that's a part of it. The part that's much more within the control of these organizations and what's pushing these up. We're seeing much stronger discipline around client selection, around fee setting, around project management, around employee engagement, around learning and development. The list goes on, right? It's that startup mode that I just talked about, but it's that ability to really think differently about what drives success and think differently about the firm of the future, right? At AEC Talent Max a month or so ago, that was probably the most exciting part is to see the rigor and discipline that organizations are putting into learning and development and knowledge management and even getting more energetic around recruiting rather than just saying, hey, we've had this, nagging issue, as long as the industry's been around about finding talent. The firms that are winning the war are saying, you know what? If referral fees work, we're just going to pay more on employee referral fees, right? For employees to refer potential candidates to the organization, 10,000 plus that they're paying to employees for referring candidates who are good fits for the org. So that's the part that's exciting, right? That we're not stuck with a lot of these issues that have been nagging for a long, long time. check your profit margin. That's of 12/31/2025. See if you're able to beat that 20.5. If you want to get the full data set, which of course has hundreds of metrics sliced and diced by peer group, so on and so forth, psmj.com/fin, FIN for financial. You can get your copy there, download it, and take a look for yourself. But wow, yeah, a lot of firms really leading the way and really pushing to become more business focused and more sustainable, I think, in a lot of ways, which is a good segue into our guest of the week. So let's jump into our conversation with Laura. I'm sure you're going to get some good takeaways in there, and then we'll come out the other side from that. Okay, today I'm excited to have with me Laura Weiss. For over 30 years, Laura has helped global brands drive growth through innovation. Originally a licensed architect, she spent a decade with the international design firm IDEO as a practice director and associate partner, and served as a principal in Korn Ferry's leadership and professional development practice. Today, Laura is an ICF certified coach, professional mediator, facilitator, and educator. She helps creative leaders in their organizations have the conversations they need to have, but often avoid, to keep their business on track and their relationships intact. She earned a bachelor's degree in architecture with honors from Cornell University and a master's in architecture from Yale University, and has an MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management. Laura, thanks for joining me today.
It's great to be here, Greg. Thanks.
I've had so many conversations, especially in the past 3 or 4 years, with firm leaders frustrated that the next generation isn't there in their organization, isn't there in the sense of having the leadership appetite, the skills, whatever the case may be, to be able to run the firm. Some of that's perception, some of it's reality, but I thought it'd be great for us to kind of dig into all things coaching, mentoring, and professional development. If you could just kind of break down a little bit, what are the real differences between coaching and mentoring and candidly just managing people? Where do you see AEC firm leaders kind of get confused and mixing these things up? And it is more than just semantics of definitions of what these things are,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And it's more than just AEC firms. I think coaching is a relatively new profession or practice, if you want to call it. And so the roles that typically get confused or conflated are coaching, mentoring, and even consulting or advising.
Yeah.
So the primary difference, as I like to think about it, is really where the source of wisdom is coming from. Wisdom might seem hyperbolic, but it really is wisdom, right? So to maybe overly simplify things, a consultant solves, right? They're solving a problem or an issue based on their subject matter expertise. The mentor tells, meaning they're basing their support on their own personal experiences, but the coach asks, right? They primarily ask questions to unlock the coachee's own wisdom, right? So oftentimes I'll draw on a presentation a Venn diagram where all three of these overlap with, solves, tells, and asks as sort of the headlines under each of these roles. They're not mutually exclusive, of course, which is why they overlap. But the real reason why coaching is proven to have such impact and is differentiated from those other forms of support is it has to do with how we develop and grow as adults. It's not by having someone tell us what to do or to fix our problems for us. And oftentimes we intuitively know what to do or what we want to do, but we get in our own way because we have a lifetime of listening to an inner narrative that oftentimes is not real or true, but it's been informed over our years of experience and learning how to essentially survive in the world, right? So effective coaching will help us challenge these beliefs and experiment with new behaviors, reflect on what we learned from those experiments, and that cycle kind of repeats in order to essentially build new habits and ways of being. So I'd say that's what really does differentiate coaching from these other also valuable forms of support.
That's the thing. You need all three, and they're all important in different ways. My sense has been over the years, we're really good at the mentoring piece. And in fact, a lot of firms will have structured programs to really encourage that and create the vehicles and the channels to do that. But the coaching piece is the one that's often lacking. And I think a big part of that is we're just not articulating correctly what coaching really is. It's that asking piece. The sports analogy is probably a perfect one, right? I mean, some of the best coaches that we see in professional sports aren't just telling players what to do, and certainly aren't just saying, watch me and copy this. They're doing much more than that. So that seems to be the huge missing piece in a lot of these programs.
It's sort of like being and doing, right? The most of the time we're focused on the doing, like do this, don't do that. But what's missing is essentially how to show up. right? Because so much of our ability to do anything is based on our inner game, right? Our inner game, maybe also to use the sports analogy, we're both from Boston, so we can't help ourselves. Your inner game is really what's running your outer game. And most of the time, we're completely unaware of what's going on with our inner game. And that's where coaching can help. Yeah. So it's both and, not either or.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it, as an industry, I think in architecture and engineering, that's the piece that doesn't really come natural for a lot of firm leaders. They haven't been taught how to be a good coach. We often use the phrase we call management by asking questions, which is really meant to be not mentoring and almost a little bit of a delegation exercise sometimes too, not solving the problem when somebody
Right.
comes to you with a client issue, a personnel issue, or whatever the case may be, but asking open-ended, broad questions to let them start to come to an answer and let them start to come to a solution that
Yeah.
candidly they're going to A, be much more bought into, and B, less likely to come to you the next time they have that same
Yeah.
challenge that comes out. That's
Exactly.
basically coaching, right? I mean, when you're kind of
Yeah.
asking questions like that.
That is much more on a coaching methodology. The more we start to recognize the value in doing things a different way, or that, the confidence from trying it and maybe failing, but figuring out how to do it better next time, or recognizing we actually do know how to do something, we're essentially rewiring our brain and our ability to understand that, you know, yes, I can do this, or I do know how to do this. That makes coaching have a more sustainable outcome than someone just telling you what to do and it might work for that one situation or that one event.
So I think the big thing with coaching too, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's much different than that sort of, I don't know, you're smart, figure it out, that old closed door mentality, which I think a lot of us have worked in or operated in over the years. And that simply isn't effective. There's a time and place for a little bit of that, I guess, but by and large, employee engagement, professional development, all the data points to being much more collaborative and interactive. But again, not asking questions in a punitive gotcha kind of way, but much more of a supportive, helping way, right?
And there is a methodology for asking questions. Questions really can be asked in a very helpful way that is aimed at a developmental opportunity, as opposed to, like you said, a more punitive, or I'm going to just tell you how smart I am by asking you a question that really is, more about me and my knowledge than what you know. So absolutely. And these are skills that anyone can learn. I call it like small C coaching, as opposed to going through a certification program to become a coach. They're really basic things that can have a really powerful effect on how you manage your talent. And this is being recognized as particularly important to the current generation of emergent leaders in the workforce that want to be developed in a different way than people in my generation or others. So we all kind of have heard about the benefits of open-ended questions as opposed to closed. The words what and how at the start of any question really serve as an invitation, because you are asking someone to share some information or share some ideas or reflect on something. Words like when and where will give you, they're open-ended also, but they'll just provide facts. What and how usually are an invitation to tell a story or to share something more in depth. And why is the most challenging of all, because unless why is used in a way that doesn't immediately put someone on the defensive, it can be problematic. I always like to say any question that begins with why could actually be rephrased with the word what.
So, okay, the elephant in the room, most AEC firm leaders, right, want to develop their talent. They want to see the firm continue beyond themselves, right? They want to see people have opportunities to develop themselves in the firm. But there are often some mistakes that happen in that process. Number one, they'll often end up promoting technical people without really preparing them for leadership, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the coaching opportunities that you see when that transition happens? I'd also love to get into this notion of, somebody being uncoachable and what that really means. But maybe before that, yeah, where are the opportunities and maybe what are you seeing that misstep as well, that sort of people get thrust into the leadership role because of their technical expertise, because of skill A, they now are in charge of responsibility B, sort of.
Absolutely. That is the big, when I reflect on, sort of the people I've coached over the last, 8 to 10 years or so, that transition point from being sort of a highly talented individual contributor or IC to then being named or positioned as a leader, now a leader of people or parts of the business, that is one of the most significant professional and maybe also personal transitions. And also, it's the one that's the most fraught with problems potentially, because unfortunately, there isn't always a seamless transition from excelling at your job as measured by some kind of, KPIs or performance
Yeah.
metrics. Those are not always the same as excelling as a leader. Excelling at those things do not necessarily translate. And, to be honest, some people are naturally gifted at leading other people, for sure, leading or managing others. But for most of us, especially those, whose formal education, especially in the design fields, was centered on individual project work and not developing the interpersonal skills required to collaborate really well, this can be a moment that can be really challenging. Fortunately, this is changing. More collaborative work is starting to happen in the academic environment, but it needs to also, as you're pointing out, be part of somebody's professional trajectory. So the one thing I'll say about this is that one of the issues or challenges is that our perception of leadership, I'll put that in quotes, is not always accurate, right? Leading is about enabling other people's success. It's no longer about your own. And it's not about having all the answers and you've reached the top of the pyramid. And so you know everything, or you feel like you're supposed to know everything, which can create its own set of challenges when you're trying to develop other people. But it sets up a legacy, as I think you're pointing out, for people just being put in these positions because they're on some kind of a conveyor belt where they've, checked all the boxes, and now the next place for them to go is into a leadership role. That is the biggest challenge. That's usually when someone like me might be called in to coach somebody as a way to help develop the person, not as something remedial. It's the best use of coaching is recognizing there's a step change and where they need to go next. So it is just as much about how they're now showing up as opposed to just are they capable of the doing.
Maybe we stop right there for a second and also talk about the difference between management and leadership. Management, much more about compliance and sort of oversight and that sort of stuff. Leadership, much more about inspiration, about vision. Those are two very different skill sets.
There's this guy, John Cotter, who was a professor at Harvard Business School for many years, who I think came up with the most succinct kind of version of what you just stated, which is managing is about guiding others through complexity, could be day-to-day complexity of projects, et cetera. Leading is guiding others through change. And,
Yeah.
you could be a leader manager, right? Management, you could imagine, is the day-to-day. Leading is the, event-based, although in the current times we're living through, change is accelerating. So that leadership skill set is going to become much more needed and put to use much more frequently.
You bet. You bet. But that's an important distinction, I think, because there you can see if somebody's rising up in a firm in the technical capacity, their ability to go into management versus leadership, those are two very different things. And I think it is the leadership piece that a lot of firms are missing all the way up sometimes. And that is the hardest piece, I think, to identify. But I don't know, maybe set us straight a little bit. Are there some coaching opportunities there? How do you know if somebody just doesn't have that ability?
There have been several organizations over the years that have come to me with asking, are you willing to coach someone who's uncoachable? Which kind of set me back a little bit because I never really thought, like, well, what makes someone uncoachable? And here in my mind, there were only two criteria for being a good coachee or coaching client: being curious enough about yourself to show up, and then being curious enough about yourself to do the work. Those are the only criteria. So when I started getting asked this question, like, would you be willing to coach? And these were people who were already in or being primed to step into a leadership role. And their boss was asking me this question. I had this insight when they, were using this term uncoachable. My belief was that these individuals were given that label because someone, usually their boss, had tried to tell them how to do something or to fix something, a behavior or a situation, and nothing changed. And this proved to be true in a couple of cases where, the boss was saying, I've asked them to do this, this, and this, nothing has changed. And then you work with the individual and you realize there's a major disconnect. Telling someone to do something or to fix something is not coaching. It's actually a bad form of mentoring or advising. This sometimes connects back to how poorly feedback is delivered, because if there was feedback that was happening on a more continuous basis, not relegated to the once or twice a year performance review, and was offered with the best of intentions, right? Where it's about your learning, about your growth. I want to give you this feedback because I care about your progress in this firm. That's going to reduce the uncoachable belief because you're supporting people in more of a sort of like in marketing terms, I guess it would be like a drip campaign. It's an ongoing conversation that comes from a place of very good intentions about that person, not something that's being presented as a threat. And our brains, by the way, respond to social threats exactly as we do to physical threats. And we could have a whole separate conversation just on feedback. But this is what sets up, I think, sometimes the uncoachable labeling is some form of feedback was attempted to be given, probably in an incredibly ineffective way, and nothing happened. And the person was deemed uncoachable. So that needs to change in order to make coaching effective. And also, honestly, coaching is voluntary. So someone really needs to, this comes back to the curiosity about yourself. You've got to want to explore that to be a good coaching candidate. But most people, I think, are. So
I would argue people are really hungry to be coached much more than they are to be managed, right? I'd
absolutely.
be curious to hear from you if you ever see younger folks who say, "No, I don't want to coach. I don't want to be coached. I just want to be managed." That's probably a huge red flag if that is the case, I guess.
Yeah. Two things on that. I mean, this kind of points to what we're hearing and learning about the Gen Z workforce and the fact that there is an incredible hunger for development and growth, partly because individuals are recognizing there's no playbook, right? There's no one way to manage a career anymore, and careers are changing so rapidly due to a variety of things, technology just being one of them. There's this desire to learn how to, be able to self-manage and self-lead in order to have a sense of agency about what you're going to do with your career.
Mhm.
And coaching absolutely is set up to do that. That said, I think that's why coaching is useful for anybody at any stage of their career, but it's certainly going to become, I think, a must-have, however it's provided for the current generation.
As you're talking, Laura, it's making me think most performance management programs or 360 reviews or feedbacks, or whatever you want to call it, are not geared towards identifying or cultivating leadership potential. Most of them are geared towards the role that you're in right now, of course. And are you performing that role in a satisfactory way? But the systems we have in place in a lot of cases aren't set up for that, what we define as leadership here versus management. You agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And there are people, in that world that, who know way more about this than I do in terms of the systems that are now evolving, what used to be called LMS systems and other that are now the newer ones, I think, and the ones that are really future oriented are geared towards this completely different way of developing talent. I think that, just back to coaching for a moment, the coaching really started to take off when it was recognized as having a positive impact on adult development, not as a remedial action due to poor performance. That's back in the day. I think that's how coaching was offered is like, if you don't change, we're going to have to get you a coach. It's going to whip you into shape. That is not at all what coaching is about. And when it's looked at as something that's proactive, premeditated opportunity to develop emergent talent, arising talent, people engage with it differently. And, it'll really help. Doesn't mean that performative issues never happen, but you're not doing it on the back end of something got so bad that someone's about to quit or they're creating a work environment that has a negative impact on others as well. So I'm a big fan of the Neuro Leadership Institute, NLI. I mean, a lot of their work is made accessible to people who are not in the world of neuroscience. They're geared towards an understanding of how the human brain works in the context of the workplace. And so understanding that in the design of the systems, and they've got their own approach to designing some of these systems. They advise a lot of Fortune 500 companies on this, are geared towards exactly what you're saying. This new world of work has changed. The human brain has not. So you need to understand the human brain in the context of designing systems that accommodate the new world of work. So it's a fascinating area.
Yeah, it does seem a lot going on there. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about I guess maybe I'll say warning signs, but I almost mean kind of green flags based on everything we've been talking about here. You have some junior or even mid-level professionals who are great at their job, but you've got to sort of identify who are the ones that could really benefit and see kind of a force multiplier, if you will, from coaching. What do you say to a CEO of a 50-person firm that's saying, what should I be looking for in my top performing project managers, technical professionals, whatever, to see if maybe they're ready for some coaching that could lead to a bigger leadership role?
I think it comes back to the open-mindedness and curiosity. These individuals being recognized as people who are open-minded and curious, and I keep using those terms, but they go directly to an individual's ability and desire to collaborate with other people. And to me, if the collaborative skills or desires are not there, it doesn't matter how smart or talented you are, you will never be a good leader. And sadly, if you were talented in your discipline, that was the primary criteria, or you were a rainmaker, right? But if you're a rainmaker and you're someone who's really great with clients, that I think by default, or at least in my book, means you do have the ability to care for and be curious about others, because that's the only way you can develop successful business. A much bigger investment for maybe people who've already been identified or are already in these roles is using a 360 assessment instrument. And you and I have talked about this. I'm a big fan and a practitioner of the leadership circle profile for two big reasons why I like that one is that, first of all, the individual who's being assessed will self-assess as well. So it's like a reflective exercise on what they are really wanting or needing in their career. Then, it's focused on identifying through the assessment of their 360 evaluators specific developmental opportunities for that individual. So it's not a personality test. It's really about being evaluated against some pretty sophisticated global data and across these 29 dimensions of business effectiveness that hold true across different cultures and industries. I think that's the other really powerful thing about this. And, the report out and the coaching around that report out can help, I think, an organization understand what an individual may need as far as very specific developmental opportunities.
When can you start looking to see who the rising leaders are? Is you start looking for the people who are just naturally attracting followers? When is it too early to look for that? Or do you even, is that a terrible way to look for potential leaders?
It's a fascinating question. I mean, I haven't really thought about it. I'm just sort of reflecting right now on my own personal experiences of either being tapped for a leadership role or when I was in a situation of having to identify people myself, or even right now, I sort of see things from the outside in my role as a coach and as a consultant. My off the cuff answer is that, like, the sooner the better, right? This comes back to a bigger question about a culture of feedback, right? If you feedback meaning ongoing, continuous conversations about somebody's learning and growth. And assuming an organization is set up so that someone always has a people manager or an advocate or a champion, I've heard all these terms used in different firms, who is looking out for one or more individuals in their growth, you can be having these conversations. And I think the people who really are curious, interested, not, what are you doing for me, more, what can I contribute? And this is true at even the most junior levels. I think there are a lot of people who think, well, when I get to level X, that's when I start to demonstrate my leadership capabilities or when I'm going to have those responsibilities. It's like you've got more agency and more influence earlier than you think. This maybe comes back to the, developing a manager's capabilities for coaching so that they will start to recognize these potential leaders as soon as possible, because it becomes a retention issue also. You don't want to wait so long that people are like, I don't know, my path is here, I don't know what their intentions are towards me, I'm just gonna, times are hard, I need to start looking at something else, and then you lose talent prematurely.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Laura. I wanted to take a quick break to share another metric that I think is really relevant for this conversation about leadership development and creating a culture of high performance that fosters a culture of developing future leaders. Something that came out of Talent Max. One of the speakers shared that the average top performer AE employee who's looking for employment is on the market for about 10 days. So a big part of that tells me, and this is something we see time and time again, a lot of recruiting processes and organizations are not built for that kind of speed, right? A lot of us have a much slower recruiting process that has much more steps in it and, several interviews and all sorts of things. It's not even the interviews that I think are the problem. It's the slack that often sneaks into the recruiting schedule. It's often viewed as important for sure, but not very urgent. And a lot of hiring managers or individuals involved in the process end up getting distracted with other more urgent client matters and things like that, and candidates sit. Okay. That wasn't so much of an issue 5 or 10 years ago, but it is now if you're looking for top performance talent. You often have to start to think about top candidates more like clients and not leaving them hanging, not sitting silent for weeks, if not months on end, before you get back to them. So, just a couple quick tips. One idea that I've seen work really well is to set almost you could say, I'll say a 14-day hiring deadline, make it 21 days, make it 10 days, whatever. But expectation within the organization when a candidate is brought to us within 14 days, we're either going to say go or no go, right? We're not going to drag it on beyond that. So that means you have to commit to a process within the firm of assigning clear accountability and target dates to get the information you need to be able to make that decision in 14 days and measure that. Share KPIs internally. How quickly are we getting offer letters out or declines to candidates that aren't the right fit? And can we beat that, right? Are we taking too long? Are we moving too slowly? Candidates are judging you based on how that process goes. And for a lot of firms, I think there's a lot of slack, like I said, in that schedule that can be consolidated without compromising the integrity of the process. Another tip that I've seen work really well is scheduling. Once you post a job and have an opening that you're now sourcing candidates for, get time blocks on hiring manager calendars and anybody else who's involved in the interview process before you've even found a single candidate. So you have those blocks, you can drop them right in there. Once you have that, you're not now having to do the polls and the coordination. And before you know it, we have to wait 3 weeks because Greg's not available. And then again, slack in the system. So book those times right at the start and then drop in the candidates as you get them. There's probably ways to simplify. I don't think I've seen a firm yet that hasn't had some way to simplify the process a little bit. There's usually a way you can consolidate some interviews. But again, with that piece, I would just be a little more careful that you don't want to rush to hire, that you make bad hiring decisions. Always, one of the things we've always advised on here at PSMJ, and I'll stick to it, is to basically always be recruiting, even when you don't have a specific need or a specific opening. Always be building that candidate pipeline and keeping the coffers full, if you will, of potential candidates. So when you have an opening, you can move pretty quickly. Okay, and now let's jump back into the conversation with Laura. Do you do a lot of coaching with senior leaders, executives in architecture and engineering firms? Spill the tea on some blind spots, some things that you wish firm leaders would be paying a little more attention to. What are some other blind spots that you'd love our audience of architecture and engineering firm leaders to hear about, to kind of look in their own teams to see if these are things that might be happening in their firms?
There are three that I don't think they're limited to professionals, AEC industries, but I've certainly seen them there. The lack of self-awareness and understanding sort of why we do what we do, what's driving our inner game in order to then manage our outer game. You really cannot lead other people, or even I'd say manage other people, if you can't lead or manage yourself. And there's so many aspects of just being a human being, like the way, again, our brain was designed is that we've got a default response for a lot of things that sometimes seem innocuous, but until you become aware of what they are, what's sort of causing them and the impact it's potentially having on other people, it's very hard to increase your effectiveness as a leader or as a manager. And the blind spot I see that's an indication of this is the belief that others are to blame for everything, right? I'll have people 9 times out of 10, some coaching conversation will be around a difficult conversation or a conflict with someone else. And it's always because that person has a difficult personality or they know how to push my buttons. And I know from my training and practice as a mediator, that is, first of all, it's probably not true. Everybody's complicit in the situation that's being talked about. But the only thing you can control is yourself. The second one, these are in no particular order, is the resistance in terms of avoiding difficult conversations. There's this wonderful term that was coined by someone whose work I really admire, and she said it's conflict debt, and you are essentially accumulating conflict debt. It works exactly like financial debt. It compounds over time. It doesn't go away. And it's essentially what's happening when you just choose not to engage in a difficult conversation. And then maybe the third one, which is a completely understandable blind spot for any of us who are trained in and love to be creative problem solver, is that we go straight to problem solving. I mean, this is what all of us are, good at and are what we're paid to do. And, I spent close to 2 decades in the innovation world where, it was dangerous if you went too quickly to problem solving, because you're quick to assume what the problem actually is, and you miss opportunities for, another way of looking at or framing the problem that would yield a much better solution, or at least not a poor solution. And this applies to people, right? When it comes to back to how do I want to support this individual, I can either tell them how to fix it, I know the answer, they should do X, as opposed to taking a step back and engaging them in a conversation to find out what's really going on. So the blind spot around going straight to problem solving applies to both being a consultant as well as being a coach, interestingly enough. So I'll kind of pause on those three are the ones that I think are the
That
big.
last one is huge. I see that all the time. That desire to jump right into fixing the problem kind of gets back to that management by asking questions we were talking about earlier. That's so key. The other thing that pops into my head as you were talking, I'd love to get your take on it. It seems to me a big part of leadership is attitude, right? And of course being curious and receptive to feedback and all those sorts of things, but also just being really jazzed up about the vision of the firm and where the company is going and where the opportunities are. Always, I guess, looking at the positive rather than harping on the negative. There's value in sort of looking at what can go wrong and looking at risk. I mean, that's absolutely a part of the daily life, but it seems like a big part of leadership is just having that positive attitude of being able to get somewhere and being able to pull others to want to do that too. Is attitude a big piece of it from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd say like mindset. And it's interesting. I just got a hold of something that Korn Ferry recently published as the 5 skills that will shape your career. And I think they mean this like for anybody. And the first one is adaptability, which is what
Hmm.
you're talking about, right? The ability to
Yeah,
navigate change and seeing it as an opportunity. It's not like rose-colored glasses. It's the, instead of we're screwed, it's the let's understand what's going on and let's figure out what we need to do about it, right? So it's that
yeah,
remaining a little bit calm. This also taps into one of the others that was on their list, critical thinking, right? Being able to connect the dots and turn complexity into clarity and insight into action. So I think it's a duality. I think it's both mindset and skill set. It's both the
yeah,
being and doing, coming back to that. Those are the two sides. If you're an exceptional leader, you've got command not only over some kind of skill set that's about the doing and the execution, but the mindset for how you show up in those situations, because you essentially are modeling everything to everyone else in your organization. We all know from having had bosses or being aware of the leaders in our organizations that we're consciously or unconsciously looking at them and their behaviors for how we respond. And so I'm
yeah,
100% agreeing with you and adding some additional language to
yeah.
what that's all about.
That makes a lot of sense. It often seems like there's this like sort of bullwhip amplification that happens in the organization. If there's a little bit of ripple of pessimism or uncertainty or tentativeness, I guess, at the leadership level, it kind of ripples down and gets amplified that all the way down at the junior level, there's just, oh my God, the company's about to collapse kind of thing. I think we kind of underestimate the magnitude to which that can happen in the organization.
Absolutely. And so communication, which is another
Yeah.
one of the 5, but wouldn't even need this list to know that, is critical, right? And I think the ability to communicate with clarity and frequency, the default reaction tends to be, we're not going to say anything till we know more. And all that
Right.
does, our brain hates a vacuum. And so we fill the void. I mean, my favorite personal example of this is if you're sitting on an airplane and it pulls away from the jet bridge to take off, and then you sit there and nobody ever comes on the intercom to tell you what's going on, your brain starts to think like, do we have engine trouble? What's going
Mhm.
on? Your brain will start to catastrophize again because our brains still operate the same way they have for millennia.
Excellent point. Yeah, I've often heard that and seen that too. That lack of communication from the top, and yeah, maybe it's more so now than 20 or 30 years ago, where things are just moving so much faster and changing so much faster in the firms, in the industry, and in the broader society that you can't go silent,
Yeah,
and that's always going to be assumed to be negative, that there's a problem, that something's wrong. Again, it can't be blind optimism, but over communication. And I've heard all sorts of examples now with even in larger firms using video, intranets, various tools, technology within the firm to communicate in video or audio, at least. That's way more compelling than just an email. And there's no excuse, I guess, of what I'm saying, to get your voice out there
yeah,
to the team, even in a 5,000 person firm, let alone a 5 person firm, and always be communicating for sure. Great, great, great
yeah.
point. Yeah. So we have to talk about the generational differences a little bit because, like I just alluded to, there is a lot of change that's happened. Even in the past 5 years, we've seen it with generational change, with a lot of the baby boomers that have kind of phased out of the firm. And a lot of firms are now in generation 2 or 3, and they have a completely Gen X leadership team and even starting to bring in millennials into the leadership team. How should leaders adjust their coaching approach when working with younger professionals that maybe just think and act and have a different mindset than they did, on all sorts of things, career development, work life integration? How should they adjust with respect to that?
Yeah, yeah. So this is a huge topic right now. The scariest thing of all is that there's a prevalence among Gen Z, just to use them as an example, that don't want to become managers. They're looking at the managers in their organization or the leaders and seeing burnout or lack of job security with layoffs, and the fact that they have to do their day job and manage people as well, or however you want to look at it. And they look at it like, this is an impossible job. Why would I want it? And that's an issue, right? Because you're not always able to cultivate, the breadth of leadership or the depth of leadership and managers that your organization needs. So one of the big things that you can start to do, which we've alluded to already in this conversation, is make the manager more of a coach. So enable managers to work with their direct reports, and especially the younger generations of people just entering the workforce, to help them understand and unlock their potential and what really motivates them and what their values are, assuming their values are aligned with the organization. How do you enable the work that they're being set up to do to align with what the organization's mission or vision is? So managers can be trained to do this, and they need to do this in the spirit of enabling the individual to learn and grow, not just it being a retrospective of past performance. And sort of related to this is helping the individuals get really clear about career advancement opportunities. What I have observed mainly through teaching, since I'm not in the workplace and not working directly with Gen Z, I'm seeing it in the classroom, is a real desire for purpose and meaning and balance, whatever that means. I don't really believe there's work life balance, but I believe you can make choices that are right for your life. And you need managers that can help guide you through those things. So, you know, big motivator for the up and coming pipeline of talent is wanting those development opportunities to help them learn how to move their career forward, whatever it may look like, right? Like I said, there is no playbook anymore. There's no one way to have a career. I'm a living example of that. But that coaching approach through the manager role, I think can make a huge difference in better integrating, this 5 generations in the workforce right now.
So much going on inside and outside the workplace that to coaches and leaders have some more empathy, and not fake empathy, but really kind of understand and appreciate that there are all these different places where people are coming from in their life and career and all that. What do you think about that?
Empathy is critical, right? That is a critical skill. And it's one of the reasons why AI is not going to replace humans anytime soon, because it does not have empathy. Yeah, I do know people who are like, look, we learned things the hard way. We worked till all hours if that's what was needed, and a belief that, why don't others do it that way? I think taking a more curious approach to resolving conflicts with other people, regardless of who they are, what generation they come from, it all starts from first getting curious about what's going on with that person. And there's a false economy around, I think, in the workplace thinking, I don't have time to have those conversations. When those conversations happen, and I think if you went through and examined how many useless meetings are on people's calendars or meetings that don't really produce anything, you would be able to eliminate a bunch of them and find time for a 20-minute chat, on a more ongoing basis with your direct reports, as an example, to better understand and kind of like I call it co-discovery and co-creation, totally borrowing from my time in the innovation world. That's the way change happens: is you co-discover. If you've got to collaborate with someone else, and I'd say a people manager and the direct report is a collaboration. If you really want that to be a positive relationship, you need to co-discover what the issue is or the challenge is so that you're both on the same page about it. And then the best outcomes, the ones where people are willing to be accountable, are co-created. Like what could we try differently? What could you do differently? How can I support you? Those kinds of things. That is what's going to set up, I think, a better integration of the newest generation into a workforce that's for a long time going to support four others, at least for a while.
Can you share an example, a case where a leader dramatically improved their leadership capabilities, I guess, using some of the coaching techniques that we've talked about here today?
There are interesting stories out there, by the way. You can read case studies in, larger articles in like Harvard Business Review or other places on the effectiveness of what might be called transformative coaching. But, and I was thinking back of the people that I've worked with directly. I'll preface it by saying that, this is really a slow roll. As adults, we need to literally rewire our brains, our thinking, and our habits around things we've been doing for a long time and may have actually worked for us once upon a time, but then we work with a coach and realize there's a different way of doing it or thinking about it. And so I would say, some of the people I've worked with are works in progress. So instead of like a single leader, I thought of some themes that maybe reflect the ways in which several leaders I've worked with have grown through coaching, as told to me based on their own reflections. I always do sort of a completion session at the end to find out what they're taking away. So one of them is really an improved sense of agency or confidence. Many of them come to coaching with a desire to do something, new or step up to that new role or job, and they're not sure they can do it or it's the right thing for them. And so in many cases they did, in fact, and sometimes it's leaving a job. So in many cases, the coaching resulted in their being able to take that next step. Another is really a more effective way to engage with their team or their boss, back to the difficult conversations or difficult personalities. I've definitely coached a lot of people through those kinds of scenarios, and they've successfully had those conversations. And then finally is sometimes it's simply clarity that it has the biggest impact on a coaching relationship, where like an individual recognizes that they're where they need to be right now or they're not, right? Coaching is really geared towards taking action, whether that action is just sort of confirmation that, okay, what I'm doing right now makes sense, even though things are really hard, or it doesn't make sense anymore. I need to move on. I need to ask for a different role, or I need to find a different place to work or something else. I wish I had a bigger transformative story to tell you, but I'd say all of the individuals I was thinking about in compiling, this list are really all works in progress, as we all are. So.
Absolutely. When we were talking about empathy, about AI, certainly another elephant in the room, I guess. There's been some people say AI will be able to be a coach at some point in the future. I'm pretty skeptical of that. But looking forward 5 years, how do you see coaching changing as the industry changes? Maybe even more than 5 years, 10 years out. What do you see as you look out into the future?
Yeah. So AI as coach already exists. That's sort of the kind of really interesting thing, is there are a lot of platforms out there where you can work with an AI coach. And there's obviously a lot of discussion and debate inside of the human coaching community about that. I mean, I will say as an aside, coaches use AI, right, for things
Sure.
like, extracting themes or managing communications. But individual working with a coach is really interesting because there are pros and cons. I mean, the pros is that it makes coaching accessible to a larger group of people. The real high impact coaching is still in the human domain because
I
of
would think
things
so.
like our ability to, as humans, to work with nuance and recognize nuance and work with silence, which is sometimes a part of coaching. We're not following some kind of algorithm or formula that, an AI has been trained on. That could happen someday, but right now there's really still a huge benefit and distinction to human coaches, but AI coaches are out there. And I think at a
Wow.
certain level of coaching, there is some utility there. It's more like buyer beware, right? It's
Yeah.
the, I think,
Yeah.
common theme with AI in general. Know what you're buying and why you're going to use it.
Wow, that's crazy. I didn't realize it was already out
Oh
there. That
yeah,
seemed, I
it
guess
is
it's just
crazy.
its own use case, maybe. All right, Laura, great stuff here. If folks want to find you, learn more, website.
Yeah, my website is lauraweiss.net. You can also learn more about me on LinkedIn if you just search for my name. I work with a variety of professionals in not just the creative fields but others, and love working with individuals, teams, and I've been working with larger parts of organizations now. So you can learn more about me at the website and set up time if you ever want to chat through one of the links there.
Sounds good. So and we'll put it in the show notes. LauraWeiss.
Correct. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura.
Thank you, Greg. It's been great. Enjoyed it.
You bet. All right. What a great conversation with Laura. I hope you got some good insight on that. Think differently about how you're developing your future leaders. And are there things that you can be doing differently to coach those potential leaders? The sports analogy is a great one that we mentioned. I think there's so many ways you can draw parallels with a high performance organization and a high performance athletic team. So we're going to skip the book of the month for this episode. And we're also going to skip the 5-minute fix. Thanks for joining us for this episode. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, whatever you got to do. Share the podcast, get the word out there. If there's anything you want to hear about in a future episode, I'd love to hear from you. Ghart, Ghart, at psmj.com. If you have a guest who you might want to see on this episode, or if you want to be on an episode, you have a compelling and interesting story to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for joining us.